Hi, this is Henry Nacino. I'm a Google Cloud customer engineer, and for the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about Cloud Spanner and specifically how to import a CSV file into a Cloud Spanner table. So just real quick information here. If I go back to the documentation in Cloud Spanner, there's some examples of how to encode, how to insert data, how to write select statements, how to create tables using DDL or data definition language. So and actually we don't have a sample that shows you how to import a CSV file. So I basically took this example right here of inserting data into the singers and albums table, customized it, and created a new Python application that allows you to specify the name of a data file or a CSV file and import that data to your specified table in Spanner. So the other thing you want to note here is that these are done in batches, and in this case we have this batch here and we have this batch over here, and each batch is actually inserted atomically. So it's all or nothing in terms of a specific batch. So a batch can contain one or more rows, and that is applied or inserted into the table atomically. So the other thing I'll point out before we kind of get started is, again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this from scratch inside of the Cloud Shell, inside of the Google Cloud Console UI. And again, I'm going to do this, do a couple examples. One that shows various data types, and then the second example shows inserting 50,000 rows. So let me go ahead and get started. So first, let me bring up the repository. The repository is hanknack / spanner import, and there's several files. There's a README here at the beginning, and I'm just going to go through the README and go through the process of creating a new table. In this case, I'm going to use a brand new table, and I'm going to clone the repository. I'm going to go ahead to the repository inside of the Cloud Shell. I'm going to do the set up the application default login, and then I'm going to go ahead and run the program. So let me do this from scratch. So let me go into, and the first table I'm going to go ahead and create a table. And I'm going to go into the text editor, and let me just grab the DDL. The table I'm going to take is import test DDL. Just grab it, and then go back, paste. So I'm just creating a new table called import test. And as you can see, various data types have an int, have a bytes data type, which can hold binary data or string data, have a date type, a float type, another int type, a string type, and a timestamp. So various simple data types that I'm using in this particular example. And now what I'm also going to do is let me go ahead and start up a Cloud Shell. Actually, open this new window. All right, now I'll actually open up the Cloud Shell editor as well. And the very first thing I'm going to do is down here, I'm going to clone this repository. So let me go back to the README. So up here, it's basically open the Cloud Shell from the Google Cloud Platform. That's what I've just done. And now I'm going to clone this repository. Okay, then I'm going to go to that directory. And the next thing I'm going to do is set the application default login. So if you're not familiar with Google Cloud, there is the concept of a default application default login. And if I'm in Cloud Shell, it's going to use a service account, which may or may not have the right permissions in order for me to insert data into this spanner table. So what I'm going to actually do is set the application default login to my user ID, which basically has privileges throughout this whole project, so I can insert data into into the tables. So gcloud auth application default login. Yes, I want to set that. It's going to give me a URL. And I'm just going to go ahead and run this in another window that you can't see it. But all I'm really doing is I pasted that URL. It's asking me to choose my account. And then it's asking me if I want to allow this program to access Google Platform Services, which I'm going to allow. And then it gives me a verification code, which I copied, and I take that verification code and I paste it, and now I'm in Spanner, or now I have the application default login. So the next thing I'm going to do is, now that I've gone through that, now I want to actually look at the various files. So as I did earlier, is I created this table. And now let me go ahead and go to the Spanner import. Actually, let me do this. Let me close this and reopen it. Yeah. Whoop. And then also let me show. Alrighty, so run sandbox, file, refresh, Spanner import. So I have various files here, and I'm going to open the actual code that I'm going to run to import data, and then I'm actually going to. This is the DDL that we just ran to create this table called import test. And let me take these data types and copy that. So, and then I also have some test data that I'm going to import. So this test data, as you can see here, is basically all the specific rows, the data that I'm going to import into my test import or my import test table. And really, I have kind of the import ID, then I have basically a string column, then I have a byte column, a date column, a time state column, another integer, and then I have a float column. And so what I need to do now is basically describe my data file. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. And this new file is going to be called test data format, and it's going to be describing my test data file. So as a head start, I just took this and let me do this. So all I really need to tell is, so basically I'm creating a file that is going to describe my data file so that it knows which columns I'm putting data into and what are the data types and what are the column names. And timestamp. Okay, float. And actually, I don't really care. I just really care if it's integer. Let me just change these. So integer. This is a string, just to be consistent. Make this bytes. Date. Timestamp. integer, and a float. So again, this is describing the data file, and I need to tell it what position. So this is going to be at the very first position, and I'm just going to keep it as start with 0, and then the next column and so on. So now again, we should have 7 columns, and these are describing my data file. So let me look at my data file again, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns. So that has 7 columns, and we basically are showing our data types: integer, string, bytes, date, timestamp, integer, and float. Okay, and this match the actual column names of my table. Okay, so let me go ahead and save that. Okay, so now I have really 3 things. I have the table, which I've created using DDL. I have the input data, which is my CSV file. And I have my format file, which describes my input data file. So now I really have everything I need to run this application. So let me go back to the GitHub README, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. And let me go back into the shell, and I'll create a new file, and I'll just call it run command. And I'm just going to put this in here so I can edit it. So my instance is hnspanner. My database ID is hnspanner. DB. My table is import test. My batch size, which I'll talk about later, but I'm just going to say this is all 4 rows at once. Actually, make sure I have 4 rows here. Yep, 4 rows. And then the data file name is testdata.csv. And my format file is testdata.format. All right, so now just grab this and you can go ahead and run it. And we'll go ahead and hit enter. And we get 4 rows inserted. So let's do one more thing. Let's look at this test data. So as you can see, this is regular kind of string format. And the byte data type, if it's a string, it basically wants you to convert that to base 64. So that's something I did in the code itself. So when I do a select statement, we're going to see a base 64 encoded string come out. And then we can convert that to a string to see this is a byte type. So let's go back to the table and let's select something else. Now we can do a preview. Should see 4 rows. And here we see that kind of that a base 64 encoded string. So if we want to go ahead to the query, and I can do a select, let's say cast byte column as string from import test. So now we should get 4 rows. Actually, let me just zoom that up a little bit. So we should get 4 rows, and we should see this the bytes column converted into a string, which would say this is a byte. This is a byte type. This is a byte type. This is a byte type, which is what we saw over here. Okay. So again, if I look at it here and just do a select on it, you're going to see that it's a base64 encoded string. And then if I do this conversion by casting it as a string, you see it come back as this is a byte type. All right, so that was all successfully done. So now the next thing I'm going to do is go through maybe an example that puts in 50,000 rows instead of just 4. And actually, let me do this, make sure this table doesn't have any data. So we have a table called site rankings, already exists. We can look at the schema real fast. Integers, strings, basically it's just integers and strings. It contains basically movie rankings. The top million movies, I think there's a data set you can download, I think daily or weekly. And I took the top 50,000 rows, and I want to import that CSV file into this table. So let me bring up a couple other things before I do that. So let's bring up one more slide. So a couple things in terms of commit limits. And again, I said for each batch insert, that's a atomic transaction, or in this case, that's a single commit. So for a single commit, there's a 100 megabyte limit in terms of the amount of data that you're committing in a single commit or a single batch, in this case. Or there's a limit of 20,000 mutations. So mutations really is kind of the number of rows you're trying to insert times the number of columns. So the example, so my table that I had there called site rankings, which I just showed you, it had 12 columns. And again, the limit's 20,000. So for me, if the limit's 20,000 divided by 12, the largest batch size or number of rows that I can commit in a single batch is 1666. Okay, so let's do this. Let's go ahead now and run it. Let's go in the Cloud Shell. Actually, let me just grab this, copy that again, and let me just paste the second row and paste that in. And Spanner DB, HN. Whoop, let's go to the front half of this. Up the table. All right, table is called site rankings. The batch size, let's up this. Just remember, I just showed you that the batch size maximum would be 1666. So I am going to import the file that has 50,000 rows, and I'm going to try a batch size, or for each batch, I'm going to try 1,800 rows for each batch, and then I have a format file. So just so you can see it, the format file looks exactly like the format file I created before, but in this case, this format file describes the data file called 50,000.csv. So let's go to the run command, and now let's grab it. Just make sure 1800. All right. I'm going to run this, and we should get an error saying that we've exceeded the maximum number of mutations. All right, and that's exactly what we have down here. The transaction contains too many mutations, information about that, and then the actual maximum number is 20,000. So let me go ahead now and just drop that to 1600. And now we can go ahead and run this. And this may take about 5, maybe 10 seconds, and we should get 50,000 rows inserted into that table. All right, and you see I have a little bug in my counter, but if we go back into the table and go to site rankings, you'll now see a preview. And if I go to query and I do a select count from site rankings, should see 50,000. Okay. So we successfully did 2 examples. Successfully did an example just showing various data types. Specifically, the one that's a little tricky was the bytes data type, which I had to do a base64 string basic to base64 encode, and then import it in just the regular way. And then if I want the data out, I have to do a cast and cast it back to a string to get the data back in a string format. So let's go back to the slides and kind of finish this up. So we just saw this in action where I put the number of rows greater than 1666. I made it 1800. And 1800 was too big, given that I had a table that had 12 columns. So we got the maximum number of mutations error. So again, this is a little review. So the CSV file, or the comma separated file that I used, contains the website rankings for top 50,000 websites. In my case, I had 50,000 rows in this CSV file. On the internet, I think it actually has up to 1 million rows, but I just cut it shorter for this example. Common errors. The first one is the one we just went through, the maximum mutations. In this case, we went over 20,000 in a single batch, and the solution is to increase the number of rows inserted per the commit, which again I set to 1600 the second time. The other message which you might find happen because we're running inside of Cloud Shell, or even if you're outside of Cloud Shell, in terms of using the right application default login. If you run you saw me run this, the gcloud auth application default login command. If I didn't do that, I would get some type of error saying I didn't have the permissions necessary to perform this operation. I've seen both of these several times as I've gone through this and built this out, but those are the 2 most common errors that I've come across. Hope this was helpful, and until next time, bye-bye.